Welcome to the Underground Temple. I'm Hayashi. I'm the head of the Isshin Kempo system. And this is the fifth in a series of ongoing seminars exploring different aspects of traditional Okinawan karate. To start off this seminar, I have asked 4 experts to join me in what I hope will be an intimate conversation about the nuts and bolts of long-term / advanced karate training. And I'd like to get into some of the weeds as well, some of the obstacles that people confront training for multi-decades. I'd like to introduce each of our panel members by giving you a little bit of a backstory on their experiences. I'm going to start with Roberto Andrade. I believe got into our children's karate class early at 6. I never used to take people until they were 7, but he had an older sister that was doing it, so he came in at about 6 and has been training for the last 36 years. When Roberto was a teenager, around 13, he also found an interest in capoeira, which he studied for 10 or 11 years and began to teach capoeira. Later on, Roberto was drawn to China, where he did an intensive training with a notable master in the Wudong Mountains in the one of the 3 great internal fighting arts of China called Xingyi. Roberto is an acupuncturist. He runs a clinic called Natural Integrated Medicine. During this time in the clinic, he also took an interest in what are called the 18 Lohan, a series of Qigong exercises that provide an excellent foundation for physical health and also the foundation for some internal martial arts. Roberto has been doing karate for 36 years nonstop. Let me go to Tim and Tom. I bring them both up at the same time because they have the unusual distinction. Both men started as teenagers. They have been consistent training partners for the last 40 years. In addition to karate, Tim did wrestling for 4 years in high school. He studied Kodokan Judo for 3 years in college. And up until just a few years ago, he had spent 5 years working on his fitness in traditional Western-style boxing. Tom started karate back as a teenager. Parallel to his interest in yoga, he took up Hatha Yoga for 3 years. He had a brief stint teaching Hatha Yoga. But then because of time, perhaps money as well, he made the decision to stick with karate. His entire family is involved in martial arts. Tom met his wife in the karate class. She went on to earn black belt ranking. His daughter, Amanda, holds a Sandan in Isshin Kempo, a Shodan in Shotokan. The son has a brown belt ranking. So there's a lot of martial activity. We often wonder what happens if there's disputes. For the past 4.5 years, Tom, along with other members of his family, have been studying Taoist Qigong. And lastly on the panel is Jay Austin. Jay goes back to the pioneering Bank Street School in Summit, New Jersey. Bank Street opened in 1962. In 1965, it made available karate to the general public. I began then in 1968. Jay came in later in the 70s. Jay eventually was groomed to become one of the senior teachers after I left. He taught at the Bank Street School from 1977 to 1980. He's had a wide interest in a variety of different martial arts. He got involved in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in the early days when it was just coming into the United States. He has studied some Hung Gar, Chin Na, and Ninjitsu. Jay has been an active student in the martial arts now for 53 years. So this is our panel of experts. They're very seasoned men. And I have a kind of a multifaceted question to all of them, in which we can start to crunch down some of these ideas of what sustains people. So the average martial artist in the United States does not train past 2.5 years. 85% drop out within that time period. Once you hit the 10-year range, you're looking at a very thin band of practitioners. And with the least experience of 36 years and the most of 53 years, you're probably talking about the top 1% in the United States are able to sustain that kind of training. So my question to all of you, and anybody can start first, is what has sustained you to go this duration? And what I'd like to do is also bring in this concept of advanced karate. What does advanced karate mean to you? Is it just time and grade, time training? I'd also like to bring in the concept of internal versus external training, which we must look at the concept of ki or chi. How is it relevant to your training? So anybody who would like to start, we're going to pass the talking stick around. Okay, Jay.
Well, first of all, I think we are all blessed here because we have full-time teachers and a full-time place to train, even going back to the original Bank Street days. I know a couple of people who were there. We had full-time professional teachers, which is very unusual. And even to this day, we have a full-time professional teacher. So I think we're all blessed because of that. I think there's some parts of my training that have literally saved my life. In the early COVID days, I ended up in the hospital for 9 days, double pneumonia. And I think what sustained me there was my training, my Sanshin breathing, my ability to focus my mind on moving my energy to parts of my body to fight that battle. And so initially, that's where I am now, but we'll continue this conversation and get into some of the more advanced teaching and why I keep training. So, let some of the other guys go first.
You can pass it.
I think for me, because I just started so young, and you go through different phases of life, as you're going through teenager, your 20s, even in your 30s, a lot of it becomes just about like physical prowess. But the more you get into an art, obviously it's a martial art, so you're looking at, obviously there's the fight of it, right? Self-defense aspect of it. But if you're only training for the fight, how long is that going to really sustain you? Is it going to sustain you the 3 years until you realize you're in like a pretty cushy place in New Jersey and maybe nothing's going to happen? Or, are you constantly dipping yourself in some sort of fire? But after a while, it starts to become, looking into deeper organizing principles and ways that you're using your art, whether it's karate or anything, to kind of help explore better awareness of situations, awareness of different principles of your body, your mind, your spirit. And it's like the rabbit hole is as deep as you keep digging. So if you keep digging, there's more and more and richer veins of knowledge and exploration. And I know we keep circling back, back to like a straight punch, back to a throw, and the different levels that you can keep attaching to that. And when you go, if you're training solo, obviously there's a discussion of what do you do in terms of kata or other supplemental exercises, or weight training or whatever you might do versus training in a group. Obviously, when you're training in a group, there's the idea of the camaraderie, the brotherhood or sisterhood, and the idea of like interacting with others. And that can obviously sustain you for a while, but if you're training on your own, you have to look for these deeper principles, and you keep refining, honing. And that for me, the kata has been a very deep dive into all of those. It's like, how do you use your art for physical strength? How do you train it for strength? How do you train yourself for staying limber? How do you do it for injury prevention? How do you do it for relaxation? How do you do it for stress hygiene? And it just goes on and on and on. And you know, when you start layering all these principles on, you can see how it's the art of it's the art that sustains you until your end of days, instead of just turning your body into like a killing machine and destroying yourself and possibly, you know, meeting an earlier, more crippled life in your later days.
Okay,
I think what sustains me is first is the community that we have. This is just a wonderful class, and I'm so glad to have been part of it. And as Roberto was saying, the longer we train, the richer the art gets. There's things I hadn't imagined when I was starting out, or before we began the Kiko studies. You know, working on the mechanical level was wonderful, but adding the Kiko level on top of it has made it all the more intriguing and exciting.
Thanks, Tim. Probably echo a lot of the sentiments of my classmates here, just phrase it a little bit differently, but my first thought when Chris posed the question, Hayashi posed the question was, a number of times we've said, did you ever think we'd go this far with this? Did you ever think you'd be here 40 years later? And my answer has always been, well, yes, absolutely. Because when I started martial arts, it was coming from the days of black belt theater and, you know, extraordinary things on film. And I always thought that looks really cool. And I always wanted to be extraordinary. And I don't mean that in a pompous sense. I mean more than ordinary. I wanted to do something beyond getting up, going to work, doing my thing. I wanted to delve inside. And there's a rich degree of subtlety, as a couple of my classmates have referred to here. And that's largely what sustains me here. The social aspects, certainly. My friends outside of work people are here in the dojo. But I love the game, too. I love the interaction, the energy exchange. I work a job that's all, you know, traditional white-collar job in my head. And this is nourishing for me to do something that's physical. But not just physical in my basement with weights, but exchanging ideas as well as physical interactions with other individuals is very nourishing. So I can't imagine not doing this, and I'm happy that my daughter has caught the same bug. Roberto referred to this, I guess, the higher, what I view as higher level martial arts training, at least at this point in my life, and it's evolved over time. When I look at the degree of subtlety, the optimization of movements, so it's incremental changes, you know, not the gross movements, but if you really look harder, the more you look, the more you see. That level of subtlety is really intriguing to me. And the other part that I would point to, as I see an advanced martial artist, is their capability with transitions. So shifting from one, whether it's actual technique or energy exchange, and I know that's kind of nebulous phrasing, but that's the way it is, shifting your energy attitude from directionality or it's more than just offense, defense, but the quickness with which you can transition within your movements is to me, a mark of an advanced martial artist.
okay, while you have the mic, I want to pick up on something that Roberto said. At some point in your training, a punch becomes more than a punch. I would add that a kata becomes something more than a kata. So maybe we could start with you. When did a punch become more than a punch? Or what did you see as that evolution in your own either striking or, in fact, any aspect of the Kihon, the Kumite, or the Bunkai?
Again, a pathway more than a switch. So an evolution in terms of, you know, talking about punches, right? Initially, you're just projecting force, and then you learn the subtleties of projecting that force with an appropriate route and how to generate more force. And then as we move further on, and again, sticking to just the punch, adding energetic elements to that too, to further increase the capabilities of that punch. Tying that to kata, right? At first, it's sort of learning the alphabet. It's a building block of potential responses to a stimulus. And then later on, it becomes more of a internal exercise, trying to figure out how do I optimize those movements with the application in mind. We've always been a heavily driven kata school, with applications being a primary focus, which I think has been wonderful for us, and it makes perfect sense that we've gone where we have with the internal study as a result, because there's been a lot of introspection throughout our kata study. And once you've nailed down the basics, if you keep looking, again, the more you see, the more you look, the more you see. I think it was completely natural that we would begin to look at the more subtle elements of kata performance.
How about for you, Tim? When did a punch become more than a punch? And Tom is talking about this transition into more subtle elements. How about some nuts and bolts? What does that mean to you?
Two things come to mind. One is, as we've been looking more toward the internal side, and I'd spent a lot of time doing daily meditation, I found that the punch became more than just moving my arm, but moving essentially will with it. And, you know, we talk about Kiko. I would define Ki in one sense as combining proper physical mechanics with proper mental focus, meaning, you know, you're not thinking about the next move in the kata or the three things you have to do after class. We're actually focused on executing the technique properly, which sounds very basic, but it's a fundamental that you have to incorporate into your practice. And then the second thing, when a punch became more than punch, when we saw in the katas, we for many years, we had worked on the kata applications as a series of blocks and strikes. Then they became blocks and throws, and then blocks and joint locks. And we saw the punch wasn't always just trying to hit somebody, but it became part of a grappling maneuver. So that we saw on a mechanical level that techniques weren't always what they appeared to be at on the surface.
How about you, Jay? When did a kata become more than a kata?
Probably 10 years ago. I remember the date exactly. I like to break it down a little bit differently. Basically, Roberta was touching on this a little bit about, I've been really delving into Taoism, which is the study of yin and yang, because when I notice martial arts, not necessarily from our school, but just in general, that most of them are not really good at the yin. They're pretty good at the yang, but not the yin. So I've been studying how to employ the drawing in, the negative, because when you're going through your stances, depending on what we're trying to accomplish with the pelvis being backwards, forwards, neutral, and that yin, and then having the opponent coming toward you, and that energy, what do we call that, away, and then we're drawing that in so that by the time they make contact with what normally looks like a punch but probably isn't, and if you move it up like this, it's a block, but just drawing that energy in a yin motion and then exploding into a yang motion. So I've been focused on my kata training solo, studying this movement, and then when we get to move around with each other, their body is either yang or yin, and then looking at the nuance of where they are and do they know, have the knowledge of this yin and yang, and teaching each other and learning from each other in a physical way, and brain mapping those nuances. So that's pretty much what I've been doing with my punch.
Let's give that to Roberto. Roberto, Jay mentioned the pelvis being significant, moving forward and backwards. So there's probably people in the audience that doesn't understand the significance of something as simple as a pelvic tilt forward or backwards. Maybe you could comment on the relevancy of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, with everything, there's like so many different levels. And also echoing a lot of what everybody's been saying, there's so many things that you're trying to stack in your favor to be the most organized human fighter. When you take apart certain things that you're just trying to tweak all these dials to line them up in your favor for a given technique, you realize the subtlety of all these different things, foot placement, et cetera, and like pelvic placement. And so when you're looking at, we might call like stacking, is when your pelvis is in a certain, just from a gross motor perspective, your pelvis is tucked in a certain way, you're tightening certain muscles, and that can create like radiating tension, right, to other things that's either going to enhance or detract whatever the technique is, right? So if I take my hand and I start to squeeze into a fist, I'm using most of the muscles that are here. But if I continue to squeeze harder and harder, I'm going to start involving other muscles in my bicep. Harder and harder, I'm going to start involving my shoulder. Harder and harder, I'm going to start involving all these other muscles in my torso until every fiber is going to be geared towards squeezing my hand to a point, right? And so how can you take advantage of principles like that? And so, and how can that be as organized as possible? Are there other areas where you want to be relaxing so that they don't inhibit, right? So like if I'm trying to squeeze my hand here, but I'm also tightening up the muscles that extend my fingers, well, that's going to inhibit my movement. It's going to make me inefficient. It's going to make me slower. It's going to make me weaker, or it's going to take my attention away from where it needs to be. And so something as simple as tilting your pelvis forward, just from a gross motor perspective, or backwards for a given technique, you're enhancing that tension and where it goes for what you're doing. And then from the energetic side, you can even talk is, you look at how the nervous system and the energy in the body will flow. And there's different locks that happen up the spine or through currents in the body. And you can optimize kind of like louvers in a dam or like in the HVAC. You're just shunting energy to one way or the other for like a given outcome, right? So if you're really trying to draw, like you're saying, you're trying to draw energy in, you might want to tilt your pelvis back for a technique, or is there a way for you to draw energy in with your pelvis forward? And then how do you then create those organizations, right? And everybody has their own way of organizing those depending on, their given circumstances. And that would create all your different arts, right? So you would have somebody who maybe does like a praying mantis style, and for whatever reason, they live in the north of China, and whatever given conditions, they'll end up moving in a certain way that somebody else might not, and it's all about optimizing, right?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So the question I wanted to ask first of you and then to the rest of the guys here, how do you describe to an audience that doesn't or maybe has not heard the terms of hard gating versus soft gating? And in your acupuncture practice, does this jibe with the energy flows through the meridian, or does it bypass that, or how does that work?
That's a very big question. I would defer to Sensei's book, his latest book, if you can get it, for sure. There's a lot, Amazon.com. But I think there's a lot to unpack in that. I mean, the hard gates, we talk about hard gates and soft gates. Hard gates would be similar to kind of what I was talking about earlier in terms of like physically orienting your body and organizing it for an outcome. Like turning your foot in or out, tilting your pelvis where you're holding the tension.
Something as simple as that.
Something as simple as that, right? And then soft gates being a myriad of different things, from headspace to breathing to intention, et cetera, and how that goes. In the acupuncture realm or medical realm, you'll see it in terms of like gross orthopedics. If a muscle's not firing, can you get in there and physically massage the fibers so that they can lengthen or shorten and this and that? And from the subtle energy, you can use acupuncture, or even in my office we use like laser stimulation or magnets or heat therapy on places that are completely non-local to the area to get it to fire or turn off. So you were looking at like hard gates being me physically getting in there, putting my elbow in your hip to get it to open, versus me maybe needling your pinky to get your other side hip to turn on, kind of thing. So I think,
So that's one of the things that keeps me interested in the advanced training, because we have to apply this to the basic katas that we've been doing for 30 years. So when you add the hard gates, you have to go back and brain map that, and then you have to brain map the soft gating with the intention in mind.
Yeah, so I would describe the heart gates as biomechanical. It's just gross physical movement. I ask someone on the street, make a fist, throw a punch, and they will do a gross physical motion punch. When we look into what are called the soft gates, as Roberta was saying, we've got what's the headspace, what's your intention, how much of your body is involved in this. Now, some people, I think if I was to take the concept of when did a punch become more than a punch, is when I began to realize that maybe a punch just wasn't with my arm, but the rest of my body was involved. So punching, standing on my tiptoes is not going to have the same impactability as me taking a resistance stance, which can absorb that shock wave. But when we get into the subtleties of the hip being forward or back, if my hip is not optimized, that punch will not be optimized, even though I'm happy with the sound of my fist against the bag. So I think everybody here would probably agree that at some point they began to realize that if they weren't making these more subtle, nuanced shifts in their movements, the correct breathing, when to breathe, you could see less optimization. And this is where it's significant, because it wouldn't really matter if it was just a 5% increase in power. We're talking about sometimes a double of power, at least a 50% increase in power. And we've all experienced it firsthand. I would say that everybody had the observation doing their first solid Kiko experiment that it didn't seem real. I'll give it over to Tim, and maybe he could comment about some of his early experiences with the Kiko.
So in addition to working with Tom, I work with a fellow, Bob Giangrande, who is about 100 pounds heavier than I am. And normally I have a very difficult time pushing him out of his stance, which is one of the ways we test whether our soft gates are applied properly. But using proper hard and soft gates, I can pretty easily push him out of his stance, and that was one of the eye-opening experiences, because I just don't have enough muscular strength to push him out of his stance without incorporating the proper hard and soft gates.
This is an incredible feat. I don't think people can appreciate. So what do you think Bob weighs?
About 250.
250 pounds in a horse stance and being pushed laterally. Tim could not move him out of that stance. That stance is designed to withstand an enormous amount of pressure against it. I was there witnessing it, and even I was astounded that not only was Bob moved out of the stance, he actually lifted up off of his feet and went back about 4 or 5 feet. We have a video of that, and we've done it multiple times. You've been pushed by Tim, flying up in the air. But if I ask the average person, if I even asked you to push him out of his stance, I don't think you're going to get him to fly up out of the air. So when you hear the term hard, soft, that can also apply to external arts, where it's mostly the gross physical activity, which I think accounts for a good 80% of the martial arts being taught in the U.S. And then that more rarefied practice, the internal arts, where you're going into what we call the soft gates, where we're trying to get into this subtlety to the point where we can do, I would say, almost borderline extraordinary power moves. But we can hear from Tom on any of that.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, the hard gates can be subtle as well. And things like tilting your pelvis, because they're physical in nature, doesn't mean that they're obvious. I was thinking about when did a punch become more than a punch? And for better or worse, I think for better, there's a certain level of repetitions that are required till your body absorbs fully the movement that you're doing before you can really start to scrutinize it and play with the nuances, because otherwise it's overwhelming and you lose the soft gates entirely. And by soft gates, I mean intentionality. If you're too focused in what you're doing And kind of think about driving when sometimes it's automatic for you, right? You wake up, kind of, I say wake up, obviously we're conscious, but a different level of consciousness when you're driving in a familiar place and you might be 10 miles down the road and everything was fine because your body knows how to drive. Similarly, if you got enough repetitions in, you can start exploring more subtle aspects without violating the postural requirements, the hard gaits that are kind of implicit in what you already learned, and start looking at all the little details. So again, one of the other things that sustains me, ton of fun, because I actually care about that 5% too.
Yeah. No, I agree. 5% is worth it. You can hold it for just a second. Well, I was thinking maybe we should discuss some of the weeds that you've personally encountered in your evolution. Obviously, martial artists do not just go in a straight line upwards every day. It's a beautiful day with martial arts. Everything is working out fine. You grasp every concept easily. Maybe anybody can jump in on what have been some of the hurdles you personally have had to experience.
Yeah, I'll start with this one. I very specifically remember getting my blue belt, and I was about 10 years old. And you pull me aside and you go, all right, Roberto, I'm going to give it to you this time. But now you really have to start training. And I think that went off in my head. And kind of back to what Tom was saying in terms of repetition is really putting the time in, which I think for me, being a very busy teenager, busy college kid, the biggest thing for me has always been time, and I'm sure for most people it's like, where do I find the time? Time, where is it? Time, I don't have time. Where's the time? And I think a lot of it is in terms of intentionality. If you make the time, it'll be there. And that's just one of the lessons I'm still struggling with, and I'm sure all of you do. But I think that as you go through, life's going to throw a million different things at you, and I think depending on how dedicated you are to the art, which for me, this has been my whole life, pretty much literally, and will continue to be. And so for me, it's you just keep putting the time in, and repetition is absolute key.
This is a broad social issue today. It's not just for martial arts, it's for everything. People, my observation is people are getting overwhelmed with the amount of information that's coming to them and the responsibility on their part to respond back to it.
100%. And I think that as you start incorporating all of these different things, like if I was to teach you one technique and then you didn't really practice it, and then you come back and then you try to layer on another technique, you might be able to get it, and then you come back, you add another technique, all of a sudden 4, 5, 6 techniques deep. If you're not training, it's not going to get into your system. You're going to be constantly juggling all that stuff in the forefront of your brain, and you're not going to be internalizing it, processing it, and you're not going to be opening up your mind to broader concepts or more subtle concepts. And so, I think for me, again, heavy repetition has been the key, and you just make time for it. I think for me, other things have just been I got having a family, having kids, obviously takes away your attention. But also physical ailments. I've blown my back out before, not being able to train. In high school, I blew my shoulder out. I still showed up to class with my arm tucked in my belt, and I kept going, until my arm was better. But if your dedication is to the art and to training and what you're going to get out of it, I think you'll end up making the effort and finding the time to train. But for me, that's been the biggest thing, is making the space so that I can do the repetition and gain the concepts, because without the repetition, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. Jay, I want you to. So Jay and I were having a conversation a couple days ago, and we were talking about a concept called the red and the white. And he was making an observation in the early days. I wonder if we could pick up on that.
Yeah, so my early days in the Bank Street School at Summit, I showed up as a pretty much open book. I think I was around 18 or so, and it was what I call a red school, which is very heavy on sparring, people just basically attacking you full force, and you had to learn very quickly how to survive. But as your skill set got a little bit better, you started figuring out how to maneuver a little bit, and that's what we call the white fighter who's using his brain, his tactics, his tools, his strategies, and not just red. So
Red as an animalistic, a
Exactly.
basic animal instinct.
So we had a very unique setup there. As I said before, it was a professional, full-time professionals. And we had 3 or 4 instructors, and they all had a different way of looking at red and white. Now, Shifu here was more of a white fighter, and I found myself more attracted to him later on when I picked up some of the red skills. That was important. But in the red and white, because we also touched on this a little bit already, and we throw around this term of soft and hard gating, we're really talking about this mysterious thing called qi. And in a lot of systems and schools and in the general public, some people don't believe in qi, but maybe we don't call it. I call it energy manipulation. And as Tim and Tom were talking about how by doing certain things you increase your power 50 or 100%. Shifu has reversed engineered all the katas to employ Kiko and mind intention, hard and soft gating
I just want to add all the katas within our system.
within our system. Not every kata out there.
And let me just add this, and while you're still talking, and that is, Ishin Kempo is an offshoot of Ishin-Ryu. And when people want to know more detail about that, I say that Ishin Kempo was the late William Scott Russell, our teacher, interpretation of Ishin-Ryu. So we are using as our base all of the traditional Okinawan kata of Tatsuo Shimabuku's Ishin-Ryu system. And yes, I have spent the last 31 years reverse engineering that, meaning we've really started to look at these moves in terms of the Kiko, which is the energy work that we're talking about, which, as Roberto and Tom have said, are the nuances in the form. And we have all discovered that there is far more nuance than what mainstream has been observing today. I'm sure there's some very good schools out there that are observing it, but they seem to be few and far between in my research. And it's exciting. And that's why all of you are here, because you're part of that excitement. You are also learning that.
Yeah, so my personal challenge has been later to pick up the grappling. And as you guys were talking about, my term is brain mapping, and doing it so much through osmosis that it gets underneath the radar, in bypassing your ego, and then it's natural, just like driving. And the challenge is watching 2 people doing a very relaxed grappling move that looks so simple until you try it yourself. And I think that process takes a while, a lot of hands-on, a lot of good training partners to make sure that, because this stuff is very dangerous. You can blow out your shoulders with a wrong move, so you have to trust your training partners. My motto is tap early and often. So that's really what keeps me interested. But the grappling and applying the soft and hard gating and the mind and the yin and yang, it's been a challenge. But mentally, for me, it's something to focus on outside of work, and it just keeps me interested.
I'm going to pass it over to you 2 guys, because you 2 have trained together for an enormous amount of time. And you're talking about you have to trust your partners. It's so true that you can be with a partner who means well, but they don't understand their own physical strength. And then they do something to you, particularly if they're charged up with a Kiko technique, and plump, that's it for your wrist. Maybe you guys could just comment on the incredible benefits of having known each other and getting comfortable with each other's energy levels.
Yeah, I do think because we have worked together so long, we understand how not to hurt each other, and that's actually pretty huge.
Almost all the time.
Yeah, we often, when we're walking out of class, we'll say, another class, no injuries, what a win. But also, there's just no ego involved. We're best friends, and we just both want to improve. We both love the nuance of the art, and that's what we're there for.
Yeah, I would just add, you get a familiarity with another individual's energy. And this goes back to my beginning about what sustains me in martial arts. It's the interaction. Chris mentioned I started out doing Hatha Yoga before I started doing martial arts, but that's a solo practice. You're in a room, so there's a community, but it's still a solo practice. The exchange with another body is key to my enjoyment and my development here. So again, great familiarity with the way Tim's body works. I know where his old injuries are and how to try and hopefully preserve that. Occasionally, we surprise each other with a Kiko technique that launches somebody across the room. But then we figure out how to dial that back or how to manage that level of intensity so that nobody gets hurt. It's been a lot of fun.
While you have it there, let's just maybe finish up and talking about, we're all aging martial artists, right? We're in the 70s. You guys are got some time to go. What has been some of your observations about your own aging process and martial arts and the way you train today?
Again, I think that's also contributed to this study of the subtleties. Because Jay mentioned going through your young man red stuff, which I think is necessary and fun, but not sustainable in the long term. I think you need to know what you can do, and once you understand that, you don't have to keep doing it. You can go explore other avenues to generate power that are less risky. For the most part. We talked about hard and soft gates. I just wanted to go back to that for a second because, again, the subtlety of hard gates and given some examples of things, thumb position, foot position, pelvis position, intra-abdominal pressure, breathing. Okay, breathing I guess you'd classify more as a soft gate. Neck position for me because I have a tendency to have a forward-leaning neck, and we've seen the influence that has. So all the postural elements, there's a ton of them, and it's hard to look at those closely until you have the repetitions to make some of that other stuff somewhat autonomic, right? But then on the soft gate side of things, between intention and breath, and the subtleties of intention, not just what do I want to accomplish, but where am I putting my energy in my body to accomplish the best goal? And then even more esoteric things like directionality, colors, the phase of the moon. Everything matters. Some things matter more, though. So there's always we call them gates, right? Roberto referred to stacking the gates, so that's kind of the process of optimization. But there's always primacy within there, and kind of finding those primary gates is cool, too. Because the situation doesn't always give you the ability to stack everything ideally, but if you know what to do, what's most important, you can fix that first. Not sure how clear that all was.
No, that was good. It was very clear, yeah. How about you, Tim? An aging martial artist.
I have to agree with Tom that, when I was in my teens and 20s, full contact interested me more. As now that, I'm 58, the idea of fighting is less interesting to me. Mastering the subtlety and the detail is more exciting. When we began and I was learning to spar, it's like overcoming the opponent was an important foundation. But now, there's a phrase Tom uses, the exchange is a conversation. Even though we're doing a physical technique, it's still a kind of conversation. And learning how to interact with another person on a physical level and also a more subtle level, energetic level, is what sustains me, long past the notion that I'm going to compete in a tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's far.
Except for the tournament of everyday life.
Yes.
Right,
But I
that's
mean,
where it matters.
yeah, but I'm not going to, when I took up boxing, I was never going to compete.
Yep.
I was interested in the mechanics. And same with karate. It's like, I'm not going to get into a fight. I'm 58. And those issues are long past, I'm glad to say. But the fact that the vistas have only increased over the decades is what sustains me.
Yeah. How about you? Have you learned anything from the old dudes here?
I feel like I'm definitely refusing to accept that I'm aging. So I think I'm sure any of us.
Typical of your age.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure I'll get wiser, hopefully. Maybe. Probably not. But I don't know. I think there's a lot I think of it on multiple levels. Number one is from a physical conditioning standpoint. I feel like as we age, at the beginning, obviously when I was in even my 20s, you just feel like, I don't need to warm up. I don't need to stretch. You just go right into it. I'm a tiger, and just go, right? And then I think that as you get a little bit older and a little bit stiffer, you end up valuing like the subtleties and softening certain things. But I think a lot of it ends up because if you continue to maintain conditioning, then you actually don't really feel your quote unquote age. I mean, if anybody has ever come to our dojo and moved around with these guys are not in your 70s. I mean, everybody moves very, very well, and I think it's because we're trying not to cripple ourselves, and I think we're trying to be wiser about how we move through things. Like, we're not looking for a fight, and we're trying to be the better martial artist who is reading the situation and trying to understand where to pull back, what door not to open, etc. And I think that goes on multiple levels, whether it's like, even with the physical stuff, it's like, okay, I know right now how I'm feeling today. My knee maybe doesn't want to bend that way, so I'm going to be more mindful of how I'm going to go through my training today. And then as you go, it starts to soften. But from even just a gross perspective of what you do to your body as a martial artist, you're thinking of engaging and turning your body into like weapons, right? So you can throw punches in the air all the time, but if you've never hit anything, the likelihood that your hand is going to be pretty hurt the first time you strike someone in the head is very high. So, I mean, as long as you maintain good conditioning that helps support your body and helps support the longevity of your health and the longevity of your art, I think you're going to be in a good space.
I think it's interesting in the trajectory that I've been on. I'd like to talk a little bit about the psychology that we have to go through and how tightly constructed our egos are, especially when we first start out. And a lot of times we hit a ceiling in our training and we can't figure out how to break through that. And a lot of times that has to do with our tightly constructed ego, and then sometimes we need a teacher to sit down with and talk this through, and letting go is the hardest part. And then through the aging process, sort of like a bell curve, we still have the same image of ourselves as being 25 years old, and as Roberta has said, that's not quite true. And then how do we deal with that? So as we age in this advanced decade, thinking about my own ego, what I have to let go of, and if you're combining mind, body, and spirit, I think we're, at least for me, delving more into the spirit side. So what does that mean? I think it means more about acceptance of where you are in life, what your age is, where you're going, and changing your view and letting go of that ego view that you had of yourself in the early days. So whatever your physical limitations are, we're using more leverage, more Kiko, more breathing, more yin, and how do we position with our other partners and see where they are at in their bell curve. And what I like working with other guys is to see, because they teach me, if I see they're not doing a move correctly, I learn from that, and I pick up a lot of information from that. So
We're going to wind it down a little bit. I want some of you in the audience, if you have any questions, are happy to take a few questions. But I wanted to say that as you go back in time in Asia and you look at the historical perspective of how and why martial arts were taught, you do see three primary platforms. There's the obvious practical. There's an enemy out there. I want to protect myself and my family, so I need those skills. There's also the therapeutic. I think for men and women that are coming from states of illness or injuries, and certainly aging as you're going up into the 50s and 60s, you're going to see some interest in preserving your vitality, preserving your physical body. And then there's this concept of the meditative platform, which Jay is alluding to with this idea that states of mind, a state of mind is not a static thing. The mind can expand and contract just like your breathing can. And there are stages of mental development that can shift your perceptions, lift your consciousness to perceiving reality in a completely unique way. A way that might shift you to begin only to perceive reality that way. So I've often said that we all exist in a certain bandwidth of reality, and many of the limitations that martial artists can hit are less about the physical and more about the mental in your case. And so we want to expand that or lift that, however way you want to look at it. And when you do, you see things differently. You have new tools available to you. New insights come from the martial art. The punch you thought was just a fist hitting with the two knuckles suddenly becomes the whole body, suddenly becomes your state of mind that you brought into that particular moment in training. So I think a well-rounded martial artist is going to be investigating each of these three platforms if you want to have a thriving, vital life. Any questions from the audience?
So I have kind of a two-part technical question.
Okay.
So
Two-part technical question.
Want to give me the mic?
I
No,
can
no.
talk loudly or okay.
No, I will repeat
You
it.
repeat. Okay, awesome. So when we
We're
consider
good.
ki, we view this as something immaterial, and I feel like we have spoken about a couple of the different ways that ki can be perceived. So I wanted to hear from the panelists, what are some of the sensations that you experience when you execute a Kiko technique correctly? We've talked a lot about different ways that you might experience energy flowing in your body. And then the second part of that question is, way at the beginning, something that my dad said was about different orientations of energy movement and the effectiveness of transitions between those orientations. So the second part of my question is, when you are directing energy in different ways, whatever that means to you, whether you're rotating one direction or another direction, whether you're moving energy up or down, do you experience something different? Is the sensation of energy flow different?
Okay, so I'm going to,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a lot.
I'll take it down to, as Jay was saying, some people don't believe that chi or ki, a thing such as chi or ki, a vital energy, even exists. And science has not yet proven exactly what it is. So that leaves it a little bit suspect for some martial artists, particularly martial artists who have been doing practices for as long as we have and still haven't seen it. So if I have this question correctly, Amanda's asking, is it a palatable thing that you sense in your body? And how do you sense it when you're doing certain things? Or how would you describe how you sense it? I'll let you guys jump in first, and then I'm happy to.
I think that in terms of its tangibility, there's a lot of questioning out there because there is a lot of self-suggestion. I think that for a lot of people, I think for most of us, because this type of thing has been sensationalized, and I've enjoyed it too. I love Jedi things with Star Wars, and I love watching fireballs getting thrown across a television screen. And I think that's great. But when we over-rationalize things and you're looking for something that's not there, I think that's like one of the biggest hurdles. I mean, having done Qigong for a very long time, I would say I've seen a lot of people who think they're doing something, but it's not actually happening. It's not physically happening. And I think that the really key difference is when you think something's happening versus when you feel something's happening. And there's something about internalizing the sensation like touch versus just a thought, even though thought forms can have energy or they can be just as tangible as any other physical object. I mean, ask anybody with like a PTSD, like they know that that's a thing. But I think for me, I've always likened everything to the sense of touch. And anytime I made strides in terms of my own sensitivities It's been trying to use that as like a gateway, like how am I feeling, blood flowing through my hand, etc. I think one of the problems when you're trying to go through applying these techniques martially is that when everything's organized, it's effortless. And I would say a lot of times it's not so much what you feel as what you didn't feel. There's like a lack of resistance because everything's just connected. And all of a sudden, it's that idea that so many people talk about, like being in the flow. Everything's just organized. And you have this like rush that brings you, it's almost like you're getting pulled in that direction or something's pushing you in that direction. For me, in terms of sensations of chi or energy, it's always felt like the sensation of when you push two north magnets together, that sort of like pressure. And anytime I'm doing visualizations, I could feel that pressure move to different areas. And I know everybody describes it differently because everybody sees the color red differently. But we all agree that it's red. And so some people might feel it as warmth or tingling or buzzing or whatever it is in a subtlety. But again, I always invite people to understand whether or not that's in their head versus what they're actually physically feeling and internalizing. And I think that when you bring things into a martial context with like bunkai, you can really pressure test those sensations. Like, oh, yeah, I think I'm moving my energy up into my arm. And I'm like, okay, let's test that. All right, is it there? Well, you can't sustain it, so try again, try again, try again, try again. And then eventually you start to break the mental down, and then you have that sensation of feeling it, right? And like this connected feeling. And I think sometimes everybody's going to put words to it, but for me it always feels like, again, pressure that's either there or not. And whether something's effortless or requires a lot more effort to do. The other sensation I get is that of being like vacuous. Like you'll feel filled and everything feels strong and connected. Or all of a sudden it feels like somebody just uncorked a drain and it's just gone. And you've got nothing and you feel frail. And you can't hold the block or the lock or whatever it is. But I think, again, everybody feels it differently, and that's what I meant.
So there was a word that you used, and I think with Amanda's question, which was really insightful, effortless. So my early training had to do with relaxed superpower. So what does it mean to be totally relaxed? Because we go through this with training all the time, and the more relaxed you are, the better the energy can flow. And we sort of get into the weeds where, okay, so if I'm totally energized in my tricep, and I want to be totally relaxed and everything else so that I get that velocity going. So that's a whole study. And then also in my early days, we did a lot of what I like to call weight shifting from stance to stance. Scott Russell was a master of that. So he could hit you 1 inch and you'd go flying like 20 feet. It was incredible. But he did that with the shifting of his weight and being so totally relaxed. And complex torque is important, I learned early on. And then later, when I started training again with Shifu, I'm able to basically do the same thing without the massive shifting of weight because I'm using some of the soft gating instead. So it was a transition for me to go from one to the other, from red to white. And now hopefully a combination of the two.
I think when you're doing a soft technique properly, it's the difference between overcoming resistance and eliminating it. A good technique should feel effortless, even when you're exchanging the technique with another person. That you don't feel like you have to overcome the other person's resistance. It's just gone.
Making notes here, but I think I have a lot of the same words as my classmates here. In my Qigong practice, that sensation of some pressure between the hands, particularly when using the hands, is probably the most sensitive to that kind of stuff. And the heat and the tingle, I can get that feeling for sure. In practice and in karate, everybody mentioned effortless power. We talked about Tim launch. I got about 25, 30 pounds on Tim, and he's launched me across the room. and I know he wasn't trying hard because it just kind of moved right through me. And I've had the same experience pushing some of my colleagues here, and it's a wonderful feeling. You want to do it again. It's actually fun to get pushed that way too. You want to feel it again too. The reverse of that is when it's not right, I get a shock through my hands like I just pushed into a post. I mean, this just happened yesterday at that class with Hayashi. So when I'm not organized properly and I try something, it's weird. Sometimes I can continue to carry through and still push out of a stance, but there's that initial shock that I feel through my wrist, like I just hit a brick wall, and then I was able to push through it, but it's all effort, not effortless. The other feelings that I get are, Roberto referred to that vacuous feeling, that feeling of a vacuum actually, like being drawn into something too. So my body being moved before my partner lays hands on me, that's an energetic thing. It's not an intentional thing on my part, but I observe it and I'm like, oh, here we go. Yeah, I think that's everything I had notes on.
Yeah, you can hold that. So my sensation has been very close to all these other definitions. Vacuum, feeling like I've been drawn in, or in some cases, a feeling like I'm moving backwards before I'm even touched by the chi field practitioner, which I find rather extraordinary. But for me, there's another sense going on that I can qualify as my chi, and that is we do project an energy field around us. We do know this energy field is in part electromagnetic, and although I couldn't tell you in precise language, because I don't have words to really describe it, I can feel these fields around people, and I get very different senses from different people, and in particular, when they are charged up. So, for example, let's say I ask Tom to try a movement of which I know he doesn't quite know the external proper organization for, say, the feet or the pelvis. Say we're doing a complex kata movement. And he can push me, and I don't feel that I'm going to be moved because I'm sensing that his field is not disrupting mine. When he does get it right, when he organizes, I go, uh-oh, here it comes, because I can feel the wave. I think the level of subtlety continues to deepen so that 10 years from now, if we get together and have a similar conversation, we're probably going to find that we're picking up even finer and finer nuances about what it feels to be charged with ki.
Yeah.
Can you, one thing we haven't talked about is the effect of Kiko on the other person.
Sure.
So maybe you want to comment a little bit about that.
Just wanted to add one thing on the feelings you spurred to Chris with the wave notion that ki does move in waves, and particularly there's a number of different ways that we've explored to move your energy. One of which is bouncing, and particularly when you bounce your ki, it's a different feeling. You could actually, and that influences timing on the execution of technique. And we've seen that sometimes when there's that shock of a clear failure, it's because the timing's wrong. You're not hitting at the peak of the wave. Generally, it's because you're moving too quickly into the move. Not that the move has to be slow, but the timing of the execution of the move has to be appropriate.
Yeah, so you could think of it as upgrading your technique to bringing in an electromagnetic shock value to it. You can't see it. The average person, if I said to Roberto or Tom, okay, charge up, however method you know to charge up, and the average person wouldn't be able to feel that. That's my rare student who has never done any energy work might have a sense that something different has just taken place before you even physically move. And we are trying to acclimate ourselves to that level of subtlety. Any other questions? Because I keep looking at the clock, but my eyes are blurry, so it looks like it's the same time.
It's 11:15.
Okay. So I think, that's great. We'll just wrap it up. And it's been a pleasure listening to all of you gentlemen talk about your training. I feel like we could go on for hours and just skip across different topics, which we will come back and we'll focus in on some singular topics next time. All right, thank you, everybody,
Thank you.
for listening.
We're going to edit out all the big errors, right?
Yep, we're going to edit out the big errors, and we'll make a much funnier video with all the errors. Jay sat down early, came early, and he said, so what are we going to be talking about? And I said, the sex life of black belts. We're going to have a panel discussion, and and we decided that that's going to
We had
get,
a million hits on YouTube.
right, we get way more hits on
Keep it
YouTube.
short on